Are there any limits to what communities can? Yes, but in order to accomplish that goal, they will need to coordinate and fight. An organized community has the power to alter any and all of the rules. Popular uprisings have been responsible for many of the significant events that have shaped the course of history. Citizens in rebellion have been successful in overthrowing even the most powerful kings and ending their reign. In the history of the world, every uprising that led to a revolution began with the people. Russia is going through such a rebellion right now in Russia. There is a significant amount of pressure being applied to the media when it comes to reporting on this topic. The Russian press has a very challenging time. Additionally, there is a consistent trend of arresting journalists, one of the nations in the globe that is responsible for the detention of the greatest number of journalists in Russia. Russian people fuming with rage at Putin. These restrictions placed on the media in Russia are not sufficient to stop the uprising among the general population. The people of Russia have had it up to their eyeballs with Putin and his practices of occupy. Nobody has any faith in Putin anymore. In just the first year of the conflict, the people of Russia have completely lost their temper. In point of fact, the Russian people have held a great deal of resentment toward Vladimir Putin for a very long time. The deterioration in the state of the Russian economy has resulted in an increase in the number of responses directed against Putin. According to recent polls conducted in Russia, Putin's approval numbers are continuing their steady decline with each passing day. Putin is now fully aware that he is on the verge of losing control. The number of people who supported Putin was gradually decreasing. To put a halt to this unfortunate pattern, Putin was forced to take a significant risk, so he went with the tried and true. When they find themselves in a politically precarious situation, all repressive leaders generate an international crisis for themselves. Because of this crisis, anyone who criticizes the oppressive leaders is now subject to very severe punishment. These punishments have been made possible thanks to the crisis. When there is a threat from an adversary, all of the soldiers are required to support the command. This was Putin's master scheme all along. He intended to do so in order to bolster his own support among the electorate and thus planned to instigate a significant conflict with Ukraine. But he was unsuccessful. What would we be without Putin? I was watching Russian state television 3 years ago, and I suddenly remembered something I had heard there. At the time, Russian citizens were being solicited for their support of a constitutional amendment proposition put forth by President Vladimir Putin that would grant him an additional 16 years in power. The host compared Putin to the captain of a ship navigating turbulent global waterways, and said that Russia is an oasis of stability and a secure haven because of Putin's leadership. Where would we be if it weren't for Putin? Nevertheless, on February 24, 2022, the captain of the Kremlin ship set sail in a stormy environment and headed directly for the iceberg, which was located in this oasis of stability and safety. The invasion of Ukraine by Putin has resulted in the loss of life and the devastation of property in Russia's neighbor. Heavy casualties were sustained by the Russian forces. According to some estimates, tens of thousands of Russian fighters perished during the conflict. The mobilization order resulted in the recruitment of hundreds of thousands, if not millions of Russian residents, prisoners, some of whom had been convicted of murder and sentenced to death were deployed to the front lines to battle against Ukraine. The Russian elections of 2020. In the meantime, the conflict that drives up the cost of food and energy everywhere in the world continues to pose a risk to Europe and the safety of the entire world. Massive challenges on par with the magnitude of the Titanic. Why then did Putin decide to go down the road of conflict and occupation? According to political observer Ekaterina Shulman, the presidential election in 2024 is on. The Kremlin was hoping for a triumph in the election that was 2 years away. They would reach their objectives in the year 2022. And then in the year 2023, they would inculcate the following notion in the Russians. The Russians are extremely fortunate to have such a captain at the helm of the ship. Not only did he guide them safely through dangerous waterways, but he also led them to uncharted and fruitful lands. In the year 2024, elections will be conducted. Where could things possibly go wrong when assumptions and computations are incorrect? Many things have the potential to go wrong. Putin does not admit that he did wrong. The Kremlin anticipated that this incursion, which it referred to as a special operation, would be carried out at the speed of light within a matter of weeks. Russia's circle would expand to include. The West's determination to support Kiev was underestimated by President Putin, as was Ukraine's capacity to resist and resist. The leader of Russia has not yet acknowledged that he made an error in judgment when he decided to attack Ukraine. Putin wants to take the situation to an even more dangerous level and increase the stakes. In this particular scenario, I find myself pondering 2 questions. First, how does Putin assess the situation as we approach the end of the first year? And second, what does he plan to do next? In Ukraine this week provided us with some helpful hints. Don't count on Moscow to deliver something like. Anti-Western sentiment was prevalent throughout Vladimir Putin's address to the nation. He laid the blame for the conflict in Ukraine on the United States and NATO, portraying Russia as the party that was not involved in the conflict. The fact that Ukraine has no intention of backing down and bringing an end to tensions with the West was made clear by the decision to suspend the only remaining agreement between the United States and Russia on the restriction of nuclear weapons, the New START Strategic Arms Reduction Treaty. Putin had a meeting with servicemen stationed at the front the following day in a stadium in Moscow. At this pro-Kremlin rally that had been meticulously planned, Vladimir Putin told the audience that a battle was being fought on historical fronts, and he praised the valor of the soldiers who were fighting on those fronts. Do not anticipate a 180-degree change in direction from the Kremlin. Moscow was as adamant that it will not come back. Will Moscow take a seat at the table for peace? Andrei Ovi, who served as Putin's economic advisor in the past, stated, if he doesn't run into any opposition, he will proceed as far as he possibly can. There is nothing that can halt him other than active military opposition. Is it conceivable that peace could be negotiated with Putin? According to Willer Renov, a settlement with Putin is not impossible. However, Putin has a history of breaking agree. He went against the agreement that established the Commonwealth of Independent States, the agreement between Ukraine and Russia, the convention established by the United Nations, the Helsinki Agreement from 1975, the Budapest Declaration, and many other agreements. Therefore, there is no arrangement that Putin will be unable to break. In addition, Russia has a lengthy list of allegations that the West is in violation of the agree. The failure of NATO to fulfill its commitment to expand eastward in the 1990s is the most important of these factors. During his first few years in power, Vladimir Putin conveyed the impression that he did not consider NATO to be a threat to Russia. In the year 2000, he did not even attempt to discount the prospect of Russia eventually becoming a member. When asked about Ukraine's potential membership in NATO 2 years later, Putin's response was Ukraine is a sovereign state and has the right to determine how it will guarantee its own security. He maintained that there would be no strain placed on the relationship between Moscow and Kiev as a result of this tension in Russia. Putin has evolved into a completely different person by the year 2023. The collective West as a whole. He portrays himself as the commander of a besieged stronghold that drives away those who seek to wipe out his nation. Putin gives the impression through his statements, comments, and references to Russian rulers such as Peter the Great and Catherine II that he somehow feels obligated to revive the Russian Empire. This impression is conveyed through a combination of these factors. So how much will it said? Russia. Putin was once the leader of his country who was responsible for bringing about stability. This image, however, has shifted in recent times as a result of increasing military casualties, mobilization, and economic penalties. Since the start of the conflict, tens of hundreds of thousands of people from Russia have fled their home. As a direct consequence of the conflict, a great number of regional battalions, armed groups, and mercenary companies such as Yevgeny PGAS Wagner Group came into existence. The relationship that the conventional army maintains with these organizations is incompatible. The friction that exists between the Department of Defense and Wagner is an indication that there is competition among them. Instability coupled with the presence of private forces is a recipe for disaster. The potential for a civil conflict to break out in Russia. According to Konstantin Renov, the proprietor and editor of Nevis GTA, which is located in Moscow, there is a possibility of a civil war within the next 10 years. There are far too many interest groups in this country that believe that the current circumstances present an opportunity for the equitable redistribution of the nation's rich. If the correct person comes to power immediately after Putin, it is possible to avoid civil war. He is a leader who will have authority over the elite and will demonstrate his determination to us those who want to take advantage of the situation. Ryov are the most powerful people in Russia, debating who the correct person should be. Ryov gave the following response when asked about this in a low voice. They are having an argument amongst themselves, right? However, does Putin have any idea that these conversations are taking place? Ryov responded. He is aware, to be sure. He is an expert in every field. This week, the leader of the lower house of the Russian parliament stated that as long as Vladimir Putin is alive, Russia will continue to exist. It was a demonstration of devotion on there. There is no question that Russia will carry on existing. But whatever comes of the conflict in Ukraine will undoubtedly have a direct bearing on Vladimir Putin's future. A year has passed since Russia first launched its invasion of Ukraine. When people in Kiev, the capital of Ukraine, heard the first explosions on February 24, 2022, it marked the beginning of the largest conflict to break out on European territory since the end of World War I. The following is what Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky had to say to the people this morning. The 24th of February saw the making of decisions by millions of people. They went with the banner that had blue and yellow stripes rather than the white flag. They made the conscious decision not to run away, but rather to confront the threat in order to confront the adversary, adversity, and this year suffering loss. And it was the year of trust, and it was also the year of unity. We made it through and we did not give up. This is the year that we will become unbeatable. We are confident that this will be the year that we win. We will not stop until we have tried. A number of cities and towns across Ukraine, including the city of Bucha, which is located in an area where Russian forces are suspected of committing crimes against humanity, hosted ceremonies. I have plans with my girlfriend. A soldier by the name of Oli Martinov was interviewed in Kiev, Sofia Square. He stated that Ukraine has been under assault each and every day for the past, despite the fact that he does not know when the war will end. He is confident that Ukraine will emerge victorious. Martiniov joked and said, "I have a lot of things planned with my girlfriend, so this better be over quickly." The most significant casualties that resulted from the war were soldiers. 145,000 Russian soldiers perished in. Russia is exerting pressure on the media in an effort to keep the number of fallen servicemen a secret. However, everyone in the globe is aware of the circumstances. Russia, which launches hundreds of assaults every single day, has been unable to make any headway in this conflict. The Russian military strategies have been revealed by the Ukrainian. Through the use of a defensive approach, the Ukrainian army is successfully driving back the Russian troops. Over the course of the past day and a half, violent confrontations have persisted in the communities of Bakhmut and Kreminna. A tank division from Russia made an attempt to reach the city of Bakhmut. A howitzer unit from Ukraine that was waiting for Russian soldiers to assault this region was. To counter the threat posed by Russian tanks, the Ukrainian military deployed autonomous aerial vehicles in the area. The Russian tank forces were unable to accomplish their objective and were ultimately forced to retreat. The Ukrainian missile squad opened fire with their weapons on the retreating Russian soldiers and tanks. During the course of the fighting, a significant number of Russian soldiers were. Ukrainian soldiers were successful in seizing Russian strongholds. During the ongoing fighting in Dansk, Ukrainian fighters launched an assault on the Russian positions and were able to take control of them. The Russian supply convoy was targeted by Ukrainian unmanned aerial vehicles that were operating in the area. Due to the explosion, 12 vehicles were rendered useless. Next, the primary objective of the Ukrainian government is to expel Russian troops from Ukrainian territory. The emancipation of Crimea from Russian subjugation is the second most important objective of Ukraine. Wednesday saw the completion of a crucial transport, which was necessary in order to meet the second goal. Ukraine was the recipient of long-range missiles that were originally intended for the U.S. installations in Europe. The retaking of Crimea will involve the use of missiles with a long range that have been infiltrated covertly into Ukrainian. In a moment, we will go into further explanation about this. At the very conclusion of the video is where you can leave a comment. Now that we have that out of the way, let's take a look at the most recent developments in the conflict. The true horrors of war were exposed to the entire globe. Putin's plans did not materialize. Both Zelensky, which he attempted to overthrow, and NATO, which he wanted to stop from expanding, became more powerful and more unified as a result of his efforts. There is not a single nation that has publicly backed the Russians. Even from the very first day of the conflict, Russian President Vladimir Putin was aware of the error he had committed, but he did not back down. Putin has never made such a significant error in judgment. During his 23 years in office, he opened everyone's eyes to the magnitude of the catastrophe. That was the conflict. It has been reported that the conflict between Russia and Ukraine, which has just finished its first year, has already racked up a total cost of $2 trillion. Russia has issued a proclamation of war. Former Russian Prime Minister Dmitry Medvedev has been quoted as saying that Russia will be destroyed if it calls an end to the conflict. In response to Med's claim that the United States is making efforts to defeat Russia, the former Russian president stated, "If the United States wants Russia's defeat, it is obvious that we are on the verge of a global conflict. It is within the United States' legal right to protect itself with any weapon, including nuclear ones. If it is our goal to defeat, in the event that Russia calls off the operation before it has achieved victory, the country will cease to exist and disintegrate into its component parts. If the United States stops providing weapons to the regime in Kiev, the conflict will come to an end." Russian spy caught in Poland. According to statements made by Polish authorities on Thursday, a Russian citizen who has been residing and working in Poland for a significant amount of time has been accused of conducting spying operations on behalf of Russia between the years 2015 and April 2022. The individual who was charged with espionage was taken into custody in April after there was evidence that he had gathered information on the military readiness of Polish armed forces and NATO forces, and then passed it on to the Russian intelligence service. An indictment was presented to the Gdansk District Court last week, according to a statement released by a spokesperson for the Gdansk District prosecutors. The spokesperson said in the statement that the suspect's espionage activity was focused on military units located in the northeastern part of Poland. which is where the Polish armed forces is conducting reconnaissance missions. In addition to this, offenses of corruption connected to the individual surfaced, according to report. This investigation is one of several that are presently being carried out by prosecutors in relation to activities carried out by Russian and Belarusian intelligence services against the Polish armed forces. A Russian fighter jet was brought down. According to reports, a fighter aircraft of the Type Tu-25 that belonged to the Russian Air Force had an accident and the pilot was. According to a statement issued by the Russian Ministry of Defense, a fighter jet of the Su-25 type that had successfully concluded its mission was involved in a collision while attempting to land at an airport in the Belgorod region. It has been speculated that a technical issue may have led to the crash of the airplane, despite the fact that the reason for the disaster is not yet. The crash of the aircraft into the empty field resulted in the death of the pilot, but there was no damage to the surrounding area. As stated by the ministry's announcement, multiple assaults have been launched against the Belgorod frontier region ever since the beginning of Russia's invasion of Ukraine. These incursions have been carried out by howitzers used by the Ukrainian army were responsible for the destruction of a number of Russian headquarters in the Belgorod district. Who do you believe brought the Russian plane down? If anyone. What's going on at the front? According to the head of the main intelligence directorate for the Ukrainian Ministry of Defense, Kirill Obov, the adversary is no longer able to supply his army with equipment, and he said the Russians have already started their massive offensive, which is the goal that they have set for themselves. But in order for no one to discover it, it must be kept in complete secrecy and be of the highest possible. They were given a mission of strategic importance, which was to approach the administrative borders of the Danes and Lagios regions by the 31st of March. After Russia's first proclamation of mobilization, POV stated that they recruited 316,000 soldiers into the Russian army. He also stated that more than 90% of these soldiers were immediately sent to the front lines without receiving any training. A small percentage went toward the formation of new units. However, the majority went toward the replenishment of units, all of which had sustained losses on the front. Case in point, a small percentage went toward the formation of new units. Russian military don't even have equipment. They do not have enough armored vehicles, OV said, indicating that Russia was unable to supply the troops with armored vehicles and tanks, and that the statements regarding the manufacture of 800 tanks per year were meaningless. He also stated that the statements were empty words. They are unable to provide their warriors with either weapons or ammunition. Russia is dispatching its soldiers into battle without providing them with any equipment. Even armored personnel carriers are uncommon. They used up 60% of the available apparatus. They are powerless to take any action. Soldiers from Russia are unable to progress in February. Analysts predicted that Russia would soon initiate a fresh onslaught in the Donbass. The Russian forces have not shown any signs of success so far, despite the fact that the losses that Russia has suffered indicating that the major attack has started. The only thing that can be said about Russian soldiers is that they perish quickly. On February 21st, the president of Ukraine, Zelensky, made an announcement that despite the massive attacks of the Russian invaders, there was no change in the front line and the Russians could not make any advance. He said this was because the Ukrainian military was prepared for them. Alexei Danlos, Secretary of the Security and Defense Council, also acknowledged that the Russian army has not made any advancements in eastern Ukraine since the beginning of its so-called Great Offensive. Record increase in China's military XP. The conflict in Ukraine caused Russia to suffer a substantial reduction in its military power, including the loss of the majority of its newest and most advanced equipment. According to a report that was published by the International Institute for Strategic Studies entitled Arms Balance 2023. According to the report, Ukraine thoroughly modernized its armed forces with the assistance of the armed forces of other countries, while China experienced an increase in military spending that was unprecedented. It was stated in the report, which gave the conflict in Ukraine an important place, that Russia covered its military losses with the announced mobilization, but it was emphasized that the newly arrived soldiers were inexperienced. The report gave the conflict in Ukraine an important place. Russia's tank arsenal is melt. According to the report of the institution that detailed the destruction of the Russian tank fleet, approximately half of the T-72 and T-72 model tanks as well as the majority of the T-80s were lost. As a result of these devastating losses, the Russian army was forced to deploy older pieces of equipment in order to make up for the shortfall was discovered to be in service. The institute estimates that Russia loses between 6 and 8% of its tactical warplanes, while the country suffers losses of between 10 and 15% of certain kinds of aircraft, pointing out that Ukraine has fewer warplanes and has sustained proportionally more losses. The institute estimated that Kyiv lost about half of its tactical warplane inventory. Ukraine modernized its weapons. It was emphasized in the report that Soviet-era tanks supplied by Eastern Europe, which competed for more modern equipment, were also shipped to Kyiv. The report noted that Ukraine which greatly benefited from Soviet-era weapons stocks, increased its combat capabilities by initiating a transformation in its army with the supply of ground weapons from Western countries. The transformation was initiated with the supply of ground weapons from Western Sea according to the findings of the report. Nearly 20 countries that are members of NATO have announced either an immediate increase in their defense spending or a long-term increase in their defense spending objectives in the report, which stated that the efforts of the Chinese army to modernize are a serious concern for the USA. It was pointed out that there was an unprecedented 7% increase in China's defense budget in 2022 compared to the previous. This increase took place in comparison to the previous years, spending Turkish and Iranian drones fighting in Ukraine. Iran provided a significant number of unmanned aerial vehicles, UAVs, to Russia, which was unable to stop air actor UAVs at the front. Russia was unable to accomplish the desired victory. Despite pitting Barak, unmanned aerial vehicles, UAVs, against Iranian-made Barak UAVs on the front lines, as the fighting in the eastern regions of Ukraine drags on, authorities from European nations have reported that Russia's supply of armed drones manufactured in Iran is running low. Officials from European nations have reported that Russia will use fewer drones in its conflict with. In December, the government of Ukraine made an announcement stating that Iran had delivered 250 drones to Russia. Everyone in the world has witnessed the triumph that Turkish unmanned aerial vehicles UAVs have had. In your opinion, how effective are Turkish unmanned aerial vehicles, UAVs? People in Ukraine have been living in a metro station because of the ongoing conflict in many areas of Ukraine. Residents of that country have been forced to take refuge in public buildings like metro stations. For the past year, since the beginning of the conflict, civilians living in large cities like Kiev and Kyiv have consistently fled to metro stations in the event that Russian forces launch a bombing. During the first few days of the conflict, the metro platforms, which were used as refuge by thousands of people seeking protection from the conflict, were transformed into underground cities. People continue to use the subways even when there is an air raid alarm, despite the fact that the metro stations, which civilians began to slowly evacuate starting in March 2022, have returned to their regular operation. Reporters spoke with residents of Ukraine who have been residing in the Kyiv metro station for an entire year and asked them about their experiences. Dozens of people who have been without homes or who do not dare to stay at home for reasons of safety continue to live in tents that have been set up in cars. Certainly a metro station in the city, which is located in an area where Russian air attacks have continued until today, albeit at a lower intensity than they have in. Yuko, who has been staying at the metro station with her daughter, who is 17 years old since the first day of the war, stated that she has not been able to reside at home for an entire year because of the war. Wake up. The battle has already started, Michael and Co. stated in reference to the explosions that took place in Kyiv on the very first day of the conflict since February 24, 2022. We have made this metro station our home and continue to do so. Today, living in the city is not a secure choice because there is always the risk of being attacked at any time. Michael Linko made his statement while pointing to the day of the assaults and said, "On February 24th in the morning, I heard what sounded like explosion. I walked out onto the balcony and there was smoke coming from all directions. I woke up my daughter and instructed her to get up because the war had already started." Michael Linko pointed out that they made their way to the metro station by removing suitcases and other items from the house, and he said the following: "Since then, we have been residing in this location with my daughter. We do not currently have any travel plans at this Wagner danger on a daily basis. We continue to report on all of the breaking news regarding the conflict between Russia and Ukraine, both on the front lines and in the diplomatic arena. When we take a step back and examine the interconnected developments as well as the bigger picture, we can see that some previously concealed knots are being untied, one by. In this report, we will unravel the mysteries surrounding the clandestine civil war raging within the Russian armed forces, because Moscow can no longer keep the secrets it has been keeping hidden from the world. What are the factors that contribute to the regular turnover of leadership in the Russian armed forces? Why is Kadyrov going into business for himself by establishing a private military? Will Putin remove the Wagner Group's permission to operate in the controlled territories? Let's take a look at how things are progressing in the Russian army, which is gearing up for the impending civil war that is likely to spill out onto the streets of Russia in the not-too-distant future. Let us begin right away. It is common knowledge that members of the Russian army, Chechen rebels, and mercenaries employed by the Wagner Group did not get along with one another during the conflict in Chi. But what is known about the relationship between the individuals who are in charge of these soldiers who are on the front line? Following the events that took place in the city of Sadar, all of the truths that had been concealed by Russia, which had been dragged into a civil conflict by the triangle of Putin, Caddy, and PRN, gradually emerged. On January 11th, the head of Wagner Group, Yevgeny Preen, made the announcement that he had taken control of Sold. Have you made any connections between this declaration and other events that took place on the same day as this one? This new turn of events led to Sergei Viking being removed from his position. As Chief of Staff, the Ukrainian intelligence community issued a statement after SRU Viking was selected to fill the role of Chief of the General. This assertion claims that PRN was the one who suggested that Sirovic should be promoted to the position of Chief of the General Staff, mainly due to the fact that Sirovic was Prism's best companion. In 2017, SRU Vic was given the role of commanding the Russian forces stationed in Syria, and soldiers from the Wagner Group fought alongside him in. By refraining from providing the Wagner soldiers with weapons, the Russian army made it abundantly obvious that it did not want the mercenaries. The Russian generals have a negative impression of the Wagner warriors because they believe they are ill-disciplined and dangerous. Because of this, the Russian generals do not want any Wagner warriors serving in their armies. The Wagner warriors are experiencing a difficult time right now. It is common knowledge that a comparatively small number of Wagner soldiers were deployed to the battlefront in order to meet their deaths during the conflict. PRN, who serves as Putin's right-hand guy, is having a tough time of it right now because PRN has alienated a lot of people. He is thinking about supporting Kadyrov Putin. Instead, according to the rumors, Prism will be fired and Kadyrov will take his possess. Putin suggested to Kadyrov that he established a paramilitary organization. Putin won't need Wagner if he uses this business because it will provide him with the soldiers he requires. The strategy that Ukraine has for Crimea, the recapture of Crimea, is one of Ukraine's primary objectives. When Ukraine regains control of Crimea, the Ukrainian armed forces will be able to recruit personnel from Crimea to fill their ranks. People on the large peninsula known as Crimea want to rebel against Russia, but Russian troops have been killing anyone who attempts to flee the peninsula. Long-range missiles are going to be used to take out the Russian military installations that are located in Crimea. As for the operation to liberate Crimea will then get underway. After that, the connection between Russia and Crimea will be removed along with the destruction of highways and bridges. Russian convoys entering Crimea will be targeted for attack. Explosions are going to be set off in ammunition storage facilities located in the area surrounding Crimea. In Crimea, a covert resistance group operating under the code name Fire has been established. This group's mission is to educate the local populace and launch an assault against Russian forces in the event that an invasion from Russia is launched. Following the completion of the 3 stages of the operation, Crimea will regain its independence.